Well, today, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets across France. In Paris, police threw tear gas to disperse protesters. Jamie Smith-Maillet is a journalist based in the town of Tours in the Loire Valley. It's about an hour outside the capital. What's been the mood like there?
We had around 10,000 people, according to local police figures, here on the streets in Tours, but it did cause some disruption to local public transport. A number of schools were closed today, and I can just see in front of me there's a few bins still on fire, causing some disruption to local tramway. So disruption at a local level, but it gives us a sort of wider idea of this nationwide demonstration across France today. And as we know, the latest Minister of Interior stats put that around 500,000. The organisers putting that around 1 million people on the streets today. So a significant movement, nonetheless, right across the country, being followed in more rural places like where I am in Tours, but right up in Paris, Lyon, Montpellier, around the big urban centres of France as well.
You said that some bins were set on fire. I mean, where you were, was there any violence?
It was relatively calm here, I would say. There was no real outburst of violence or clashes that have been reported. I know there have been some skirmishes and clashes reported across France, but here in Tours there wasn't much to report on in terms of violence. However, there was a relatively significant police presence, and we know across the country that there were 80,000 police deployed today, including other measures, tear gas used in places. So relatively significant police presence for this between 500,000 and 1 million demonstrators on the streets, depending which statistics you look at.
And what is it the protesters want, or rather don't want? I mean, they don't want any more budget cuts, do they?
Absolutely, yeah. The head of all of this is the austerity measures that essentially were tabled by the former Prime Minister François Bayrou, but there are still concerns on the streets today that these austerity measures will continue. Despite the new Prime Minister's attempt to appease on some measures, it looks like for those many on the streets that these strong austerity measures will continue. And those were the concerns I was hearing from people today, that simply these measures were just too tough, that the new government essentially is a continuity of the past, of Macron politics, and they just don't want any of these measures which look at changing tax level brackets and also welfare cuts and freezes for the next while. So that was the sense of the protests on the street today, but with also a sense essentially of frustration and anger of a continuity of Macron politics and of the political class overall.
I mean, the government says that France is living beyond its means. It's got a huge amount of debt and it needs to find a way to cut that. I mean, when you ask the protesters, do they accept the fact that France cannot afford all the sort of provisions that it's been making?
There is a general level of understanding that there is debt, and that's some of the message I was hearing today. But the counter message to that of protesters on the streets is that the way the current government is looking about addressing that is not fair enough. And they're looking for a fairer tax system. They're also looking for higher tax levels of business and simply trying to more or less uphold the prized welfare and solidarity system that France has. Now, we've seen this in the past in France with pension reforms. So it does look like it's coming back round again. So there's a level of acceptation on the streets that this exists, but there's the way about addressing it is the question that those on the streets were not completely happy with today.
Freelance journalist Jamie Smith-Maillet speaking to me from Tours. Well, it now falls to the new Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu,